A divorced mom got a useless bunker in her settlement, but when her loyal German Shepherd scratches at the rusted door, what they uncover inside will change everything. Inside the cold, crumbling walls, millions of dollars sealed away for decades, hidden where no one was supposed to look. But the money is only the beginning. Behind a false wall, they find secret letters and photographs that hint at a buried family past no one ever told her about. Was this bunker just a forgotten relic or a vault of promises made to men who never came home? And when powerful forces demand she give it all up, will she honor the truth she's discovered, or lose everything trying? What hidden legacy did her father leave behind, and why was she the one meant to find it? Let me know in the comments which city or country you're listening from. If you like stories that connect us, don't forget to subscribe before you leave. Hannah Cole sat in the leather chair, her fingers absently tracing the worn armrests as she listened to the lawyer's monotone voice. The wall clock's steady ticking matched her heartbeat, both counting down the final moments of her 18-year marriage. And lastly, Mrs. Cole, Mr. Peterson adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, shuffling through the stack of papers on his mahogany desk. We come to the matter of property division. Hannah nodded, too tired to correct him about the missus. Her whole body felt heavy, like she'd been carrying rocks in her pockets all day. The morning sun streaming through the office windows did nothing to lift her spirits. You'll retain the following assets, he continued, running his finger down a typed list. Your personal savings account, currently holding $8,342. The 2012 Toyota Sienna minivan, with approximately 142,000 miles on it. He paused, squinting at the paper. And there's also, well, this is unusual, an Amen, obsolete Cold War-era bunker, built into the hillside off Route 12. Hannah blinked. A what? A bunker, Mr. Peterson repeated, looking equally puzzled. According to these documents, it's on a small wooded lot about 15 minutes outside of town. Your ex-husband specifically declined any interest in the property. His exact words were. He adjusted his glasses again. That useless concrete box can go with the van. Of course Tom would say that, Hannah thought. He'd always been quick to dismiss anything that didn't immediately benefit him. It was one of the many reasons they were sitting here today. The lawyer handed her a thick envelope containing all the final paperwork. Everything's been signed and filed. You're officially divorced, Miss Cole. Divorced. The word felt strange, like a shoe that didn't quite fit. At 43 years old, Hannah had never expected to be starting over. She gathered her purse and the envelope, managing a weak smile for Mr. Peterson as she stood. Thank you for everything, she said softly. The drive home in her awarded minivan was a blur of familiar streets and stopped traffic lights. Hannah's mind wandered to the bunker. She didn't even remember Tom mentioning it before. Then again, there were a lot of things Tom hadn't bothered to tell her over the years. When she pulled into the driveway of her rental house, a modest 2-bedroom she'd moved into 3 months ago, she could hear Chuper's deep bark from inside. The sound brought the first real smile to her face all day. The moment she opened the front door, 90 pounds of German Shepherd nearly knocked her over. Chuper's tail wagged so hard his whole body shook, and he pressed his nose against her hand, whining softly. Hey, buddy. Hannah scratched behind his ears, letting his unconditional love wash over her. At least you still want me around, huh? Chuper had been her constant companion since she'd adopted him 4 years ago, shortly after her son left, for college. Tom had complained about getting a huge dog at their age. But Hannah had known from the moment she saw those intelligent brown eyes at the shelter that Chuper was meant to be hers. She dropped her purse and the envelope on the kitchen counter, then filled Chuper's water bowl. The house felt empty and quiet, even though she'd been living here alone for months now. The bare walls still needed pictures, and moving boxes remained stacked in corners she hadn't gotten around to unpacking. Hannah pulled out the property documents, spreading them across the counter. The bunker paperwork included a survey map showing its location on a 2-acre wooded lot. According to the description, it had been built in 1962 as part of some local civil defense initiative. What am I supposed to do with a bunker? She asked Chuper, who had settled at her feet. He thumped his tail against the floor but offered no suggestions. The rest of the afternoon slipped away as Hannah tried to keep busy. She unpacked 1 box of kitchen items, made several trips carrying things between rooms, and deliberately avoided looking at old photos still stored on her phone. Every task felt like moving through mud, necessary but exhausting. As evening approached, she microwaved a frozen dinner and sat at her small kitchen table. The silence pressed in around her, until Chuper's suddenly insistent pawing at the back door broke through her thoughts. You just went out an hour ago, she reminded him, but Chuper continued scratching at the door, looking back at her with unusual intensity. When she didn't immediately get up, he let out a soft whine and pawed harder. Okay, Hannah said, pushing away her half-finished dinner. What's got you so worked up? The moment she stood, Chuper's entire demeanor changed. His tail began wagging again, and he pranced in place, clearly excited. It wasn't his usual, I need to go out behavior. This was different, almost like he was trying to tell her something. Hannah watched him for a moment, then glanced at the property papers still spread across her counter. The bunker lot wasn't far, maybe a 15-minute drive. For a brief moment, she considered grabbing her keys and heading out there now, but common sense prevailed. The sun was already setting, and exploring an unknown property in the dark probably wasn't the smartest idea. Tomorrow, she promised both herself and Chuper, who had returned to pawing at the door. Tomorrow we'll go check out this mysterious bunker of ours. Chuper tilted his head at her words, his ears perking forward. Then he moved away from the door and settled onto his bed in the corner, though Hannah noticed he kept his eyes on her, watching with that same strange intensity. She returned to her cooling dinner, pushing the packaged meatloaf around with her fork. The events of the day, the finalized divorce, the unexpected bunker, Chuper's odd behavior, swirled in her mind like leaves caught in an autumn wind. For the first time since the separation, Hannah felt something besides sadness or anger. She felt curious. The property papers seemed to call to her from the counter, and she found herself picking them up again, studying the survey map more carefully. The lot was heavily wooded, backing up against state forest land. The bunker itself was built into a natural hillside, with what appeared to be a single entrance facing east. Chuper's collar jingled as he lifted his head, watching her examine the documents. His tail thumped against his bed once, twice, then settled. What do you think, boy? Hannah asked, managing a small smile. Ready for an adventure tomorrow? The big shepherd's tail thumped again, and Hannah felt a warm flutter of anticipation in her chest. Maybe Tom was wrong. Maybe this useless concrete box would turn out to be something more. At the very least, it gave her something to focus on besides the ending of her marriage, a mystery to unravel, a new beginning hidden in the woods. She cleared away her dinner dishes and got ready for bed, all while Chuper maintained his watchful vigil from his corner. As she turned out the lights and headed to her bedroom, she heard him settle more fully into his bed, letting out a contented sigh. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring. For tonight, Hannah was simply grateful for the loyal companion who had chosen to stick by her side, and the promise of something new to discover in the morning. The morning sun painted long shadows across Hannah's driveway as she loaded a few supplies into her minivan, a flashlight, some work gloves she'd found in the garage, and a rusty crowbar that had been rolling around under the back seat for years. Chuper sat in the front yard, watching her preparations with unusual intensity, his tail sweeping back and forth across the dewy grass. Ready for our expedition? Hannah asked, holding the passenger door open. Chuper bounded into the van with more energy than she'd seen from him in weeks, turning in circles before settling into his usual spot. His excitement was contagious, and Hannah found herself smiling as she slid behind the wheel. The drive took them past familiar neighborhoods that gradually gave way to more scattered houses and eventually thick woods. Hannah checked the property map spread on the seat beside her, comparing mailbox numbers to the address listed on her papers. The morning light filtered through the trees, creating shifting patterns on the worn asphalt of the narrow road. This should be it, Hannah muttered, turning onto an overgrown gravel drive nearly hidden by tall grass. The van bumped along the rough track, until it opened into a small clearing. She parked and sat for a moment, studying the hillside ahead of them. The bunker entrance was almost completely camouflaged by decades of neglect. Thick vines draped across the concrete face like a curtain, while tall weeds sprouted from every crack and crevice. The steel door was barely visible, its surface a mottled patchwork of rust and packed soil. Chuper whined softly beside her, pawing at the window. Okay, boy, Hannah said, reaching for her supplies. Let's see what we've got here. The morning air felt crisp against her face as she stepped out of the van. Chuper was already circling the entrance, his nose working overtime as he investigated every inch of the surrounding area. The sound of birds and rustling leaves filled the clearing, making the scene feel less abandoned than it looked. Hannah pulled on the work gloves and approached the door. Up close, the concrete structure looked even more imposing, a dark mouth set into the hillside, waiting to swallow whatever ventured inside. She reached out and touched the steel door, feeling the rough texture of rust beneath her fingers. Well, this isn't exactly Better Homes and Gardens material, she said aloud, trying to lighten her own mood. But there was something about the bunker that demanded a more serious approach. This wasn't just some forgotten storage shed. It had been built with purpose, even if that purpose was now lost to time. Chooper had focused his attention on the base of the door, scratching frantically at the packed soil there. His actions grew more intense, accompanied by soft whines that made Hannah's skin prickle with goosebumps. She'd never seen him act quite like this before. "What is it, boy? What do you smell?" Taking a deep breath, Hannah braced herself against the door and pushed. The metal groaned in protest but didn't budge. She tried again, throwing her shoulder into it this time, but the door remained stubbornly fixed in place. Years of rust and settled earth had effectively sealed it shut. "Good thing I brought backup," she muttered, returning to the van for the crowbar. The tool felt solid in her hands, its weight somehow reassuring. Back at the door, she wedged the curved end into the gap between door and frame, trying to find the best leverage point. Chooper backed away slightly, watching with alert interest as Hannah strained against the crowbar. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like tearing metal that echoed through the clearing, the door shifted slightly. Encouraged, Hannah repositioned the crowbar and tried again. The second attempt produced another horrible screech of metal on metal, but the door moved more significantly this time. Rust flakes and dirt showered down as Hannah worked the crowbar back and forth, gradually forcing the door open wide enough to peer inside. The smell that wafted out was musty and stale, the accumulated breath of decades sealed away from sunlight. Hannah pulled her flashlight from her back pocket and clicked it on, sending a beam of light into the darkness beyond the door. Dust motes danced in the illumination, stirred up by the disturbed air. Chooper moved forward cautiously, his nose working overtime as he sampled the underground air. Hannah followed close behind, sweeping her flashlight beam across the interior. The concrete walls were bare and gray, disappearing into shadows that her light couldn't quite penetrate. The floor was smooth beneath her feet, though scattered with debris that crunched with each step. As they moved deeper into the bunker, Hannah's flashlight revealed more of the space. The chamber was larger than she'd expected, extending back into the hillside like a concrete cave. The air felt thick and heavy, as though the darkness itself had weight. Suddenly, Chooper froze. A low growl rumbled in his chest, not his usual warning bark, but something deeper and more primal. Hannah's flashlight beam followed his gaze, and her breath caught in her throat. Along the far wall, stacked in neat rows that disappeared into the shadows, were dozens of military-style crates. They were sealed tight, their olive-drab paint barely visible beneath years of dust. Each box bore stenciled markings that time had rendered almost illegible. Chooper's growl continued, a steady vibration that seemed to resonate with Hannah's racing pulse. The crates loomed before them like silent sentinels, holding whatever secrets had been deemed important enough to lock away in this forgotten place. Hannah stood motionless, her flashlight beam fixed on the mysterious cargo. The morning sun, still bright outside, seemed very far away. In that moment, surrounded by concrete and shadows, she realized that her useless inheritance might be anything but worthless. The only question was, what exactly had she stumbled upon? Hannah stared at the rows of crates, her flashlight beam trembling slightly as she swept it across their dusty surfaces. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she approached the nearest one, kneeling beside it to get a better look. The military insignia, though faded by decades of darkness, was still visible on the lid, an eagle clutching arrows in its talons, surrounded by tech she couldn't quite make out. Her gloved hands traced the edges of the crate, feeling the solid construction beneath years of grime. The wood was sturdy, built to last, and showed no signs of rot despite its long imprisonment in the damp bunker. She positioned her crowbar at one corner, taking a deep breath before applying pressure. The lid resisted at first, then gave way with a sharp crack that echoed through the chamber. Chooper's ears perked up at the sound, but he remained watchful, his eyes fixed on Hannah, as she set the crowbar aside and lifted the loose section of the lid. The beam of her flashlight revealed something so unexpected that for a moment, Hannah couldn't process what she was seeing. Neat bundles of paper, wrapped in what looked like banking strips, filled the entire crate. Her hands shaking now, she reached in and lifted one of the packages. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice barely audible. It was money. United States currency, stacked and banded in organized bundles. The bills were old, not ancient, but definitely from decades past. She fumbled with one of the bands, reading the denomination marked on it, $10,000. Hannah dropped the bundle back into the crate as if it had burned her. She scrambled backward, nearly losing her balance on the concrete floor. Her mind raced, trying to calculate what she'd just seen. If each bundle contained $10,000, and there were dozens of bundles in this crate alone, this can't be real. she muttered, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew they were wrong. The money felt real. It looked real. And there were more crates. So many more crates. Chooper nudged her hand with his nose, perhaps sensing her distress. His presence helped ground her, bringing her racing thoughts back to the present moment. She scratched behind his ears, taking comfort in the familiar gesture. "Should we check another one, boy?" The German shepherd's tail wagged in response, and Hannah found herself moving toward a second crate. This one was positioned slightly higher in the stack, but she could reach it without too much difficulty. The process of opening it was easier now that she knew what she was doing, though her hands still trembled as she worked the crowbar. The lid came loose with another crack, and Hannah's flashlight revealed exactly what she'd expected and feared. More bundles of currency, arranged in the same precise manner as the first crate. She picked up one of the packages, examining it more carefully this time. The bills were crisp, despite their age, protected by whatever preservation methods had been used to pack them. Millions. She breathed, the word barely a whisper in the still air. There must be millions of dollars here. The reality of what she'd discovered began to sink in. This wasn't just some forgotten military storage. This was something else entirely. Questions flooded her mind. Where had this money come from? Why was it here? And perhaps most importantly, what was she supposed to do with it? Chooper's excited bark startled her from her thoughts. He'd been remarkably well behaved throughout their exploration, but now his tail was wagging furiously, picking up on Hannah's emotional state. The sound echoed off the concrete walls, creating a chorus of phantom barks that faded slowly into silence. "Shh," Hannah said automatically, though she couldn't help but smile at his enthusiasm. At least someone was enjoying this surreal situation. She began to pace the length of the bunker, trying to clear her head. The flashlight beam bounced off the walls as she walked, creating dancing shadows that seemed to mirror her agitated thoughts. She needed to think this through carefully. Whatever this money was, whatever its purpose had been, it was now technically her property, part of her divorce settlement. A sudden movement caught her attention. Chooper had moved to the far wall of the bunker and was pawing at the concrete surface with unusual intensity. His nails scraped against the gray material, creating a sound that seemed different from what she'd expect. "What is it, boy?" Hannah approached, focusing her flashlight on the area that had captured Chooper's attention. The beam revealed nothing obviously unusual about the wall, just the same gray concrete that made up the rest of the bunker. But as she drew closer, she felt something odd, a draft of air, slight but noticeable, coming from somewhere it shouldn't. Frowning, Hannah reached out and placed her palm flat against the wall. The concrete felt different here, not quite as solid as it should. She rapped her knuckles against it, listening carefully to the sound. The hollow echo that came back confirmed her suspicion. This section of wall wasn't quite what it appeared to be. Chooper continued pawing at the spot, his actions becoming more determined. Hannah played her flashlight beam along the edges of the wall, looking for any sign of seams or hidden mechanisms. The draft persisted, a whisper of moving air that shouldn't exist in a sealed concrete bunker. She took a step back, studying the wall with growing curiosity. First the money, and now this. Whatever this bunker had been used for, it clearly held more secrets than a simple Cold War relic should. Chooper's continued interest in the wall, combined with that unmistakable hollow sound when tapped, suggested there was something beyond. Another chamber, perhaps, or some kind of hidden passage. The German shepherd looked up at her with eager eyes, his tail still wagging, as if to say, "Well, aren't you going to investigate?" But Hannah had already discovered enough world-shifting surprises for one day. She needed time to process what she'd found, to think through her next steps carefully. Her flashlight beam fell once more on the stacks of crates, each one potentially containing thousands or millions of dollars. The magnitude of her discovery felt overwhelming, like a weight pressing down on her chest. She needed to leave, to get out into the fresh air and clear her head. Yet even as she prepared to exit the bunker, Hannah couldn't ignore the persistent sound of Chooper's paws against that hollow wall, or the mysterious draft that shouldn't exist. Her father's military training had taught her that attention to detail could mean the difference between life and death. And right now, every detail about this bunker was screaming that there was more to discover. The setting sun painted long shadows across the hillside as Hannah's minivan bumped along the dirt path leading to the bunker. She'd spent the afternoon gathering supplies. A heavy-duty lantern, work gloves, safety goggles, and various tools she hoped might help investigate the mysterious wall. Chooper sat alertly in the passenger seat, his ears perked forward as if he could sense the importance of their return visit. "Ready for more exploring, boy?" Hannah asked, parking in the same spot as before. The German shepherd's tail thumped against the seat in response. The evening air held a slight chill as they made their way to the bunker entrance. Hannah's flashlight beam caught spider webs glistening between the overgrown weeds, and her boots crunched on loose gravel. The rusted door still stood open from their earlier visit, a dark mouth leading into the earth. Inside, Hannah set up the lantern, its bright light filling the concrete chamber with a warm glow that made the space feel less forbidding than it had in the beam of her flashlight. The stacked crates of money seemed almost ordinary now, like boxes in any storage room, except for the millions they contained. Chuper didn't even glance at the crates. He made straight for the suspicious wall, resuming his determined pawing at its base. Hannah pulled on her work gloves and knelt beside him, examining the concrete more carefully. In the lantern's steady light, she could see fine cracks spider webbing across one section. "Good boy," she murmured, running her fingers along the cracks. "You knew something was here all along, didn't you?" She picked up the hammer she'd brought, testing its weight in her hand. The concrete looked old, possibly degraded enough that she might be able to break through. Still, she hesitated. Breaking down walls in a military bunker, even one she technically owned, felt like crossing a line. Chuper's insistent whine decided her. Taking a deep breath, Hannah struck the wall where the cracks seemed widest. The impact sent vibrations up her arm, and small pieces of concrete scattered across the floor. She struck again, and again, working methodically along the crack line. After several minutes of steady work, sweat beading on her forehead, a larger chunk of concrete broke free. Chuper barked excitedly, pawing at the newly exposed edge. Hannah could definitely feel air movement now, a steady draft flowing from behind the wall. She redoubled her efforts, carefully breaking away more concrete until finally, with a grinding sound, an entire slab shifted and fell forward. Hannah jumped back, pulling Chuper with her as dust and debris billowed out. When it settled, they faced a dark opening about 3 feet square. Hannah lifted the lantern, its light revealing a hidden chamber beyond the broken wall. The space was smaller than the main bunker, but just as carefully constructed. Unlike the main room with its stacked crates, this space felt personal, almost like a time capsule. The first thing that caught her eye was a Marine uniform, folded with military precision and laid carefully on a small shelf. Even after what must have been decades, the fabric looked remarkably well preserved in the protected environment of the sealed chamber. "What is all this?" Hannah whispered, more to herself than to Chuper. She reached out to touch the uniform but stopped short, suddenly aware that she was reaching into someone's private space, preserved across time. Below the uniform shelf sat a metal box. Hannah lifted it carefully and set it on the floor in the lantern light. Inside, she found a stack of sealed envelopes, the paper yellowed but intact. They were arranged chronologically, each one dated and numbered in neat handwriting. But it was what she found beneath the letters that made her breath catch. A collection of black and white photographs, preserved between sheets of wax paper. With trembling fingers, Hannah lifted out the top image. The photograph showed 2 young Marines standing at attention in front of what was unmistakably this very bunker, though in the picture, the entrance was new, unmarred by rust and time. Between them stood a German shepherd, its pose so similar to how Chuper often stood that it made Hannah blink in surprise. She studied the faces of the 2 Marines, and suddenly felt the world tilt beneath her feet. The Marine on the left, she knew that face. She'd seen it countless times in old family albums, young and proud in uniform before life and age had softened its edges. "Dad?" she whispered, her finger tracing the familiar features. Her father had never mentioned this place, never spoken of any secret bunker or hidden chambers. Yet here he was, decades younger but undeniably himself, standing guard over what she now knew held millions in cash. Chuper pressed against her leg, offering silent support as Hannah sank to the floor, spreading out more photographs. Each one seemed to tell part of a story she'd never known existed, her father and his fellow Marine in various locations, always with the German shepherd, always somehow connected to this bunker. The weight of the discovery pressed in on her. This wasn't just some random military installation she'd inherited in her divorce settlement. This was something personal, something that connected directly to her father, to his past, to secrets he'd carried to his grave. Her hands shook as she gathered the photographs and letters, knowing they held answers but unsure if she was ready for them. The uniform she left untouched. It felt too personal, too sacred to disturb just yet. The drive home passed in a blur. The pale moon hung low in the sky, casting just enough light to silver the edges of the clouds. Hannah clutched the packet of letters in one hand, while the other gripped the steering wheel. Chuper sat quietly beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. As they crested the final hill before town, Hannah glanced at her faithful companion. "What did we just find?" she whispered. Chuper's only response was to press his nose against her arm, as if to say they would figure it out together. The letters seemed to burn with possibility in her lap, decades-old messages waiting to be read, secrets waiting to be revealed. Whatever her father had been involved in, whatever purpose the bunker and its millions had served, the answers lay within these sealed envelopes. Hannah just wasn't sure she was ready to open them yet. Sunlight streamed through Hannah's kitchen window, casting a gentle glow on the weathered envelopes spread across her wooden table. Steam rose from her coffee cup as she carefully arranged the letters in chronological order, treating each one as if it might crumble at her touch. Chooper lay at her feet, his chin resting on his paws, but his ears remained alert, as if he understood the weight of the moment. Hannah's hands trembled slightly as she opened the first envelope. The paper inside was thin but sturdy, preserved by decades in the sealed chamber. The letterhead bore official military insignia, and at the top, a name jumped out at her: Colonel Richard Hensley. She began to read, her coffee growing cold beside her. "Dear Mrs. Martinez, it is with profound regret that I write to you about your son, Private First Class James Martinez. While official channels have informed you of his sacrifice, I felt compelled to reach out personally. Your boy was more than just a Marine under my command, he was family." Hannah's throat tightened. Letter after letter told similar stories, each one deeply personal, each one carrying the weight of loss and honor. Colonel Hensley had written to dozens of families, his words careful and heartfelt, going far beyond standard military notifications. In one particularly moving letter, dated 1973, the colonel's usually steady handwriting showed signs of emotion. "If you are reading this, take care of my brothers. They never came home. Their trust and their honor remain in this place, waiting for the right moment, the right person to fulfill a promise I made to them all." Hannah sat back, running her fingers through her hair. The millions in cash, the hidden chamber, the letters, it was all connected, but how? She needed help piecing this puzzle together. Reaching for her phone, she dialed the local library. After 2 rings, a cheerful voice answered. "Riverside Public Library, how may I help you?" "Hi, yes," Hannah said, straightening in her chair. "I'm doing some historical research about a Colonel Richard Hensley. He was stationed here sometime in the 1960s and 70s. Would someone be able to help me learn more about him?" "Oh, you'll want to talk to Mr. Peterson, our town historian. He knows everything about everyone who's ever lived here. Let me check his availability." While the librarian checked the schedule, Hannah absently stroked Chooper's head. He looked up at her with those knowing brown eyes, tail thumping gently against the floor. "You're in luck." The librarian came back. "Mr. Peterson has an opening this afternoon, at 2 o'clock. Shall I put you down?" "Yes, please. Thank you so much." Hannah spent the next few hours carefully reading through more letters. Each one revealed pieces of Colonel Hensley's character, his dedication to his men, his deep sense of responsibility, and most intriguingly, hints about some sort of trust he had established. At 1:45, Hannah gathered the most relevant letters into a folder. She decided to leave Chooper at home, promising him she'd be back soon. He watched her from the window as she backed out of the driveway, his posture alert as always. The library was a grand old building of red brick and white columns, a remnant of more prosperous times. Inside, the air smelled of books and wood polish. At the main desk, a gray-haired woman directed Hannah to a study room where Mr. Peterson was waiting. The historian was a small man with wire-rimmed glasses and a bow tie, looking every bit the part. His eyes lit up when Hannah mentioned Colonel Hensley. "Fascinating man, the colonel," Mr. Peterson said, pulling out a thick folder from his briefcase. "Came here right after his final tour in Vietnam. Bought that hillside property in 1971, kept to himself mostly, but was always respectful, always willing to help his neighbors." "Did he have any family?" Hannah asked. "No wife, no children. Lived alone except for his dog, big German Shepherd, if I remember correctly. The colonel used to say his real family was his Marine brothers." Mr. Peterson adjusted his glasses. "He passed away about 5 years ago. Heart attack, they said." Hannah shared some of the letters with Mr. Peterson, watching as his eyebrows rose higher with each page. "These are remarkable documents," he said finally. "The colonel was known for looking after Gold Star families, those who lost someone in the war. But I had no idea he kept such detailed correspondence." They spent the next hour piecing together Colonel Hensley's history. He had commanded a Marine unit in Vietnam, losing several men in a particularly brutal campaign. After returning home, he seemed dedicated to some private mission, though no one knew exactly what it was. "There were rumors," Mr. Peterson said, lowering his voice. "Some said he was protecting something valuable, something that belonged to his fallen Marines. But no one knew for sure, and the colonel never confirmed or denied anything. As the afternoon light began to fade, Hannah thanked Mr. Peterson for his help. He made copies of some relevant documents for her and promised to dig deeper into his archives. Back home, Chooper greeted her with his usual enthusiasm. Hannah fed him dinner, then settled into her favorite chair with the folder of letters. She pulled out the photograph she'd found in the hidden chamber, studying it in the soft lamplight. The image seemed different now, knowing more about Colonel Hensley. She could see the strength in his stance, the protective way he positioned himself next to her father. The German shepherd in the photo stood proud between them, so similar to Chooper it was almost eerie. Her father had never mentioned Colonel Hensley or the bunker. What role had he played in whatever mission the colonel had dedicated himself to? The millions in cash, the carefully preserved letters, the hidden chamber. It all pointed to something larger, something her father had helped protect. Hannah carefully tucked the letters back into their folder. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more research, more pieces to this puzzle. But for now, she just sat with the knowledge that her father had been part of something important, something honorable. Before heading to bed, she took one last look at the photograph. Her father's young face smiled back at her, frozen in time beside his commanding officer and their faithful dog. Whatever secrets lay in those letters, whatever trust the colonel had established, Hannah knew she was now part of it too. Hannah's fingers drummed nervously on her steering wheel as she navigated through the city streets. In the backseat, Chooper watched the world pass by, his ears perked forward with interest. The historian's words from their meeting earlier that day still echoed in her mind. The Veterans Hall meets every Thursday afternoon, Mr. Peterson had told her, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. If anyone knows more about Colonel Hensley, it would be that group. Some of them served with him. The Veterans Hall turned out to be a modest brick building with an American flag flying out front. Hannah parked her minivan and checked her watch, 2:15 in the afternoon. Through the windshield, she could see older men in veteran caps gathering near the entrance. "Come on, boy," she said, clipping Chooper's leash to his collar. "Let's see what we can learn." Inside, the main room hummed with conversation. About 20 veterans sat in folding chairs arranged in a circle, some with canes propped against their seats, others in wheelchairs. The walls were covered with military photographs and medals in display cases. A tall man with silver hair noticed them first. "Well, look who we have here," he said warmly, walking over. "I'm Jack Morrison. That's quite a shepherd you've got there. Hannah Cole," she introduced herself. "And this is Chooper. I'm here because, well, I'm trying to learn more about Colonel Richard Hensley." The room grew noticeably quieter. Several veterans turned to look at her, with increased interest. "Richard Hensley?" Jack's expression softened. "Now there's a name I haven't heard in a while. Come on, join us. We were just starting our meeting." Hannah took an empty chair, Chooper settling at her feet. The veterans introduced themselves one by one, many of them Vietnam-era servicemen like the colonel had been. "The colonel was a complicated man," said George Walker, a veteran with thick glasses and trembling hands. "Carried a lot of weight on his shoulders, especially after that last mission in '69. Another veteran, Bill Thompson, nodded solemnly. "Lost some good men that day. The colonel never quite got over it. Started collecting their things, photos, letters, personal effects. Said somebody needed to keep them safe. He built that bunker," added Jack. "Used his own money at first. Said it was a memorial of sorts, but we all knew there was more to it than that." Hannah leaned forward. "What do you mean?" The veterans exchanged glances. Finally, a thin man named Frank spoke up from his wheelchair. "The colonel felt responsible, you see. Not just for their memories, but for their families too. Started putting money aside, combat pay, benefits that never got claimed. Said he was holding it in trust." "A trust fund?" Hannah asked, her heart beating faster. More meaningful looks passed between the veterans. Jack cleared his throat. There were rumors. Some said he'd set up accounts for the families. Others thought he was gathering evidence of some kind. The colonel kept his own counsel about it. A white-haired veteran named Mike shifted in his chair. "Your father, he was Cole, wasn't he? Marine sergeant?" Hannah nodded, surprised. "Yes, did you know him?" "Sure did. Good man, your father. He and the colonel were tight, especially after they came back. Used to see them together at that bunker property, working on something. They had a dog too, looked just like yours." Chooper's ears pricked up at this, as if he understood he was being discussed. Several veterans smiled at his alert expression. "The colonel trusted your father," said George. "Whatever they were doing out there, they kept it between themselves. Some kind of arrangement or understanding." The meeting continued, with veterans sharing memories of both Colonel Hensley and her father. Hannah listened intently, trying to piece together the fragments of information. Chupa remained vigilant at her feet, occasionally raising his head when someone's voice grew emotional. As the meeting drew to a close, most of the veterans began gathering their things. But one man, who had been quiet throughout the meeting, gestured Hannah over. His name tag read David Wilson. "I served with both of them," he said in a low voice. "Your father and the colonel, they made a pact, you know. Something about protecting the truth and taking care of unfinished business." Hannah's hand tightened on Chuper's leash, her mind reeling. "A pact? What kind of pact?" David glanced around before continuing. "Your father was with him that day, the day they lost those men. They both carried that burden. Whatever's in that bunker, it's part of a promise they made. To the dead, to their families, to each other." Hannah stood there, stunned, as the weight of this revelation settled over her. Chuper pressed against her leg, offering silent support as he always did. The leash felt like an anchor in her trembling hand, keeping her grounded as her world shifted once again. The pieces were starting to come together: the hidden money, the carefully preserved letters, her father's silence about his service years. But instead of answers, Hannah found herself facing even more questions. What exactly had her father and the colonel promised to protect? And now that she had discovered it, what was she supposed to do? Hannah sat in her modest kitchen, spreading papers across the wooden table while morning light filtered through the curtains. Her coffee had gone cold, forgotten as she pored over printouts about military funds and government property laws. Chuper lay nearby, his chin resting on his paws, watching her with attentive brown eyes. After 3 hours of research yielded more questions than answers, Hannah decided to seek professional advice. She called Riverside Community Bank and scheduled an appointment with their senior financial advisor, Marcus Thompson. The bank's lobby was cool and quiet when Hannah arrived that afternoon. The marble floors echoed with her footsteps as a receptionist led her to Thompson's office. The advisor was a serious-looking man in his 50s, with wire-rimmed glasses and carefully combed gray hair. "So, Miss Cole," Thompson said, folding his hands on his polished desk. "You mentioned on the phone this concerns a matter of historical currency." Hannah nodded, choosing her words carefully. "Yes. I've recently come into possession of some older U.S. currency through an inheritance. I need to understand the legal implications." "What kind of amounts are we talking about?" Thompson asked, reaching for a notepad. Hannah took a deep breath. "Multiple crates, military issued, based on the bands, we're looking at millions." Thompson's pen stopped moving. He looked up sharply, his expression changing from professional interest to concern. "Military issued? From what period?" "Vietnam era. Late 1960s. Thompson removed his glasses, cleaning them slowly with his handkerchief. "Miss Cole, I need to be very clear with you. If what you're describing is authentic military currency from that period, it's likely classified as government property. Regardless of how you came to possess it, the legal ownership would still rest with the United States government." Hannah's stomach tightened. "But it was part of my older saying, divorce settlement. The property it was found on." Thompson held up a hand. "The property might be yours, but government funds remain government property, regardless of where they're found or how long they've been there. My strong advice would be to surrender it immediately to the proper authorities." "But what about the families?" Hannah asked, thinking of the letters she'd found. "Some of this money might have been meant for them." "Miss Cole," Thompson's voice grew stern, "keeping government property, especially of this magnitude, could result in serious legal consequences. As a financial professional, I am obligated to advise you to report this immediately." Hannah left the bank feeling shaken. The afternoon sun had taken on a harsh quality, and she squinted against it as she walked to her car. Everything had seemed so clear when she'd first found the money, a hidden trust for families who'd lost loved ones. Now it felt like she was walking into a legal minefield. That evening, after hours of wrestling with her conscience, Hannah decided to return to the bunker. She needed to document everything properly before making any decisions. The sun was setting as she drove down the quiet road, Chuper alert in the passenger seat beside her. As they approached the bunker, Chuper's demeanor changed. His ears flattened, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. Hannah slowed the car, scanning the area. Nothing seemed obviously different, but she trusted Chuper's instincts. She parked a little further away than usual and clicked on her flashlight. Chooper stayed close to her leg, his body tense. As they neared the bunker entrance, he suddenly stopped, growling more intensely. Hannah swept her flashlight beam across the ground. There, in the soft soil near the bunker's entrance, were fresh boot prints, much larger than her own. The prints led both to and from the door, suggesting someone had visited and left. Her heart pounding, Hannah examined the heavy door. It looked undisturbed, still secured with her padlock, but something felt wrong. Chooper's continued growling confirmed her unease. Someone had definitely been here, studying the bunker, perhaps looking for a way in. The drive home was tense. Hannah kept checking her rearview mirror, though she saw no one following them. Inside her house, she double-checked every window and door, turning all the locks with trembling fingers. Chooper followed her from room to room, his protective instincts in full force. In her bedroom, Hannah sat on the edge of her bed, her mind racing. The boot prints meant someone knew about the bunker, someone who might know what was inside. The bank advisor's warnings echoed in her head, mixing with memories of the veteran's stories about her father's pact with the colonel. Anxiety tightened her chest as she considered her options. Report everything to the authorities? Try to find the families first? What would her father have wanted her to do? Chooper took up his position at her bedroom door, lying across the threshold like a furry sentinel. His soft growls continued intermittently into the night, telling Hannah that her faithful protector sensed something she couldn't. Sleep would not come easily tonight, not with the knowledge that someone else was interested in the bunker's secrets. Through the window, the moon cast long shadows across her bedroom floor. Hannah pulled the covers tighter around herself, grateful for Chooper's steady presence. Whatever tomorrow might bring, at least she wasn't facing it alone. Hannah woke before sunrise, her mind still churning with questions from the previous night's discovery. Chooper's warm presence at the foot of her bed provided comfort, but she knew she couldn't delay investigating further. The boot prints outside the bunker had made it clear, time wasn't on her side. She made a quick breakfast of toast and coffee, her hands shaking slightly as she spread butter across the bread. Chooper watched her intently, sensing her nervous energy. "We need to go back, boy," she told him softly. "There's more to find." The morning air was crisp and cool as they drove to the bunker. Hannah parked in a different spot this time, partially hidden by overgrown bushes. She scanned the area carefully before approaching the entrance, but there were no fresh boot prints. Whoever had been here hadn't returned. Inside the bunker, Hannah made her way directly to the hidden chamber they discovered. The beam of her heavy-duty flashlight illuminated the space, dust motes dancing in its path. She'd been so focused on the photographs and letters during their first visit that she hadn't thoroughly examined everything else. Now, methodically, she began to search. Behind where the Marine uniform had been folded, she found a thick leather-bound book. When she opened it, her breath caught. It was a ledger, its pages filled with neat handwriting and columns of numbers. "Look at this, Chooper," she whispered, settling cross-legged on the concrete floor. The German shepherd sat beside her, his warm presence steadying as she began to read. The ledger contained names, dozens of them, each accompanied by dates and amounts. Her fingers trembled as she recognized one name in particular, James Cole, her father. His entries appeared regularly, marking deposits into what appeared to be the bunker's trust fund. "Dad was part of this, all along," she murmured, running her finger along the neat rows of his handwriting. The dates stretched back years, well into her childhood. While she'd been growing up, playing soccer and doing homework, her father had been secretly contributing to this hidden fund. As she turned the pages, trying to make sense of the numbers, Chooper suddenly moved away from her side. His nose worked overtime as he investigated the chamber's far corner, where an old military duffel bag lay partially hidden behind some boxes. "What is it, boy?" Hannah asked, setting down the chamber ledger. Chooper pawed gently at the bag, whining softly. The duffel was made of faded olive canvas, its surface dusty but otherwise well preserved in the dry air of the bunker. Hannah's hands shook as she unzipped it. Inside, she found more letters and documents, but one envelope immediately caught her eye. Written in familiar handwriting, her father's handwriting, were the words, "For Hannah, when you are ready." Her heart pounding, she carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the ink slightly faded but still perfectly legible. "My dearest Hannah, if you're reading this, you've found our secret. The Colonel and I, along with others, started this fund for the families of those who never made it home. Some of these men left behind more than memories, personal effects, letters, pieces of their lives that their loved ones should have. We couldn't return everything right away. Some items were classified, some families had moved, and some wounds were too fresh. But we made a promise to each other and to them, that one day, everything would find its way home. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you about this while I was alive. But I know you, Hannah. I know your heart. You'll understand why we did this, and I trust you to continue what we started. In this bag, you'll find instructions, contact information, and everything else you'll need. This isn't about the money, sweetheart. It's about keeping promises. It's about making sure no one is forgotten. I love you, Dad. Hannah read the letter 3 times, tears blurring her vision. In the bag, just as he'd promised, she found detailed instructions, names, locations, items to be returned, and careful notes about each family's situation. Her father and the colonel had documented everything meticulously, preparing for the day when someone else would need to complete their mission. She sat there for a long time, surrounded by the physical proof of her father's secret life of service. Chooper stayed close, occasionally nuzzling her hand when her tears fell too heavily. The money in the crates no longer seemed important, at least not in the way it had before. Now, she understood it was just part of a larger promise, a sacred trust passed down from one generation to the next. Finally, gathering everything carefully, Hannah made her way home. At her kitchen table, she spread out the documents, trying to organize the overwhelming amount of information. Chooper settled beside her chair, his head resting heavily in her lap as she cried quietly. These weren't tears of sadness or confusion anymore, but of understanding and purpose. Her father had left her more than just a mystery to solve. He'd left her a mission to complete, a way to honor not only his memory but the memory of all those who never made it home. Through her tears, she began to read the detailed instructions, knowing that each name represented a family still waiting for closure, still hoping for answers. Her father had trusted her with this responsibility, and she was determined not to let him down. Hannah spent days preparing for the meeting, carefully organizing the letters, photos, and personal belongings into neat piles on folding tables at the Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged each item with care, knowing the emotional impact they would have on the families who had waited decades for answers. Chooper sat alertly nearby, his brown eyes following her every move. The old hall smelled of coffee and wooden floors polished by years of use. Morning light streamed through high windows, dust motes dancing in the golden beams. Everything needs to be perfect, she whispered to Chooper, straightening a stack of weathered envelopes. Her father's careful notes had helped her contact dozens of families, each one responding with a mix of shock, gratitude, and tearful anticipation. By 10 o'clock, people began arriving. First came the veterans, many walking with canes or wearing caps decorated with military pins. They nodded respectfully to Hannah, some patting Chooper as they passed. Then the families started filtering in, elderly wives supported by grown children, middle-aged men, and women who had been kids when their fathers disappeared into the war, even grandchildren eager to learn about relatives they'd never met. Martha Wilson, 82 years old, approached a table with trembling steps. Hannah guided her gently to a chair. "Your husband was Sergeant David Wilson," Hannah said softly, retrieving a small box. "He left these for you." Martha's wrinkled hands caressed a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon, a gold wedding band, and a small photo album. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she opened the first letter. "I never knew he wrote these," she whispered. "They told me everything was lost." Similar scenes played out across the hall. A man in his 50s held his father's dog tags, pressing them to his chest. A woman showed her teenage daughter a grandfather's handwritten diary. The room filled with murmured conversations, soft crying, and occasional laughter as memories were shared. Jake Martinez, a local reporter Hannah had invited, moved quietly through the crowd, notebook in hand. He spoke gently with families, recording their stories with evident respect. His presence would ensure these long-delayed reunions wouldn't go unnoticed. "This is incredible," he told Hannah. "How did you find all this?" Before she could answer, the hall's double doors burst open. 3 stern-faced government officials strode in, their polished shoes clicking on the wooden floor. The lead official, a thin man in a dark suit, held up a document. "Miss Cole," he announced loudly, "I represent the United States government. These items are classified military property. We're here to take possession immediately." The room fell silent. Chooper instantly moved to Hannah's side, his hackles rising as he positioned himself between her and the officials. A low growl rumbled in his throat. "These aren't government property," Hannah replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "These are personal belongings. Letters, photos, wedding rings. They belong to these families." The official adjusted his tie. "The bunker and its contents fall under military jurisdiction. Your ownership of the property does not extend to classified materials stored within." An elderly veteran stood up, leaning on his cane. Those boys wanted their things to go home. The colonel promised us. The colonel's unauthorized actions do not override federal regulations, the official stated flatly. Martha Wilson clutched her husband's letters to her chest. You can't take these. Not again, please. Hannah watched tears form in the old woman's eyes, and something hardened inside her. She thought of her father's letter, his trust in her to complete this mission. Chuper's growl deepened as the officials took a step forward. No, Hannah said firmly, raising her voice so everyone could hear. I will not hand over these items until every family receives what was promised to them. These aren't classified secrets, they're pieces of people's lives. Wedding rings, letters to children who never got to read them, photos of loved ones who never came home. The official frowned. Miss Cole, if you resist, we'll be forced to. To what? See? Hannah interrupted. To take away these memories again? To tell these families they have to keep waiting. Haven't they waited long enough? Chuper barked sharply, as if emphasizing her words. Around the room, people began to stand. Veterans, wives, children, grandchildren. First, they moved closer, forming a protective circle around the tables of precious belongings. My father and the colonel made a promise. Hannah continued, her voice growing stronger. They promised these items would find their way home. I intend to keep that promise whatever it takes. Jake Martinez was scribbling frantically in his notebook. The government official looked around the room, seeming to realize he was facing not just one stubborn woman, but a united front of families and veterans. Suddenly, someone started clapping. The sound spread, growing into thunderous applause that filled the old hall. Chuper's tail wagged as he maintained his protective stance, and Hannah felt tears in her eyes as she looked at the determined faces around her. The applause said everything that needed to be said. These belongings would stay right where they belonged, with the families who had waited so long to have them back. The government officials stood awkwardly, their authority diminishing in the face of such unified resistance. Martha Wilson reached out and squeezed Hannah's hand. Your father would be so proud, she whispered. Hannah squeezed back, knowing that in this moment, she was doing exactly what her father had trusted her to do. The clapping continued, each beat strengthening her resolve to see this through, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The morning sun cast long shadows across the hillside as volunteers erected a large white tent near the bunker entrance. Hannah watched them work, her hands fidgeting with the folder she held. Chuper sat beside her, his warm presence steadying her nerves. Tables lined the interior of the tent, each carefully arranged with boxes of personal belongings. Hannah had spent days organizing everything, matching items to names, preparing for this moment. The familiar weight of responsibility pressed on her shoulders. As families began arriving, Hannah's trembling hands smoothed her blouse. One by one, they filed in, elderly wives leaning on adult children's arms, grown children who had never known their fathers, grandchildren hearing stories passed down through generations. Welcome, Hannah said, her voice catching slightly. Today, we begin returning what has waited so long to come home. She started with the letters. A stack of yellowed letters, ration envelopes, each containing words frozen in time. Mrs. Patricia Martinez, she called out. An elderly woman stepped forward, supported by her daughter. When Hannah handed her the bundle of letters, Mrs. Martinez pressed them to her chest, tears streaming down her face. He wrote these right before, she whispered, unable to finish. More names were called, more treasures distributed, a silver pocket watch that still ticked, a collection of photographs showing young men laughing together in distant jungles. Dog tags that clinked softly as they were placed in trembling hands. Wedding rings that had traveled home without their owners. The bank representative stood quietly to one side, explaining the trust fund arrangements to each family. The colonel's hidden fortune would support veterans' families for years to come. Scholarships for grandchildren, medical care for aging spouses, housing assistance for those in need. As each item found its way home, Hannah felt the weight lifting from her shoulders. This was what her father and the colonel had wanted. This completion of a promise made decades ago. An elderly woman approached Hannah last. Her white hair was neatly pinned back, her eyes bright with tears. She held a small box containing her husband's compass and last letter. You brought him home, she whispered, wrapping Hannah in a tight embrace. After all these years, you brought him home. Chuper sat faithfully at Hannah's side, his tail wagging gently as he watched over the gathering. In his own way, he too understood the importance of coming home. The sun had dipped below the horizon when Hannah returned to the bunker one final time. Long shadows stretched across the worn concrete entrance as she pushed open the heavy steel door. The familiar musty scent greeted her, though now the space felt different, lighter somehow, as if unburdened of its long-held secrets. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty spaces where the collective power crates had stood. The concrete walls, which had once seemed so imposing, now felt like old friends keeping their silent watch. Hannah's footsteps echoed softly as she made her way to the hidden chamber, Chooper padding quietly beside her. Kneeling before the opening in the wall, Hannah carefully withdrew the photograph from her jacket pocket. Her fingers traced the edges of the image, her father's young face smiling back at her, standing proud next to the colonel. Both men looked so alive, so unaware of the weight of history they would carry. She placed the photograph gently beside the colonel's carefully folded Marine uniform, still crisp despite the decades. The brass buttons caught the beam of her flashlight, glinting like stars in the darkness. "Thank you," Hannah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for trusting me to finish what you started." Chooper settled beside her, his warm presence reassuring. His steady brown eyes watched her with understanding, so much like the German shepherd in the old photograph. The connection across time felt almost tangible in that moment. Hannah remained still, feeling the presence of her father as strongly as if he stood beside her. The pact that had bound these men together, a promise to care for their fallen brothers and the families left behind, had finally been fulfilled. The weight of that completed mission settled around her like a warm embrace. When she finally rose, her legs stiff from kneeling, Hannah took one last look at the chamber. The uniform and photograph would remain guardians of this sacred space. She guided Chooper back through the bunker, their footsteps marking their final passage. At the entrance, Hannah's hand rested on the heavy door. With quiet reverence, she pulled it closed and turned the lock for the last time. This place would no longer be a forgotten ruin of the Cold War, but a sacred space of memory, honor, and promises kept. Autumn leaves danced in the crisp morning air as Hannah stood before the transformed bunker entrance. The once rusted door now gleamed, restored to a dignified shine. A newly installed bronze plaque caught the sunlight, each engraved name telling its own story of sacrifice and honor. Chooper sat attentively at her side, as people began gathering for the dedication ceremony. Veterans arrived in their dress uniforms, some walking slowly with canes, others in wheelchairs pushed by family members. They formed a respectful semicircle around the bunker entrance, their faces solemn with remembrance. Hannah's fingers found Chooper's fur, drawing strength from his steady presence. She watched as families approached, carrying bouquets of red, white, and blue flowers. Children held hands with grandparents who had waited decades for this moment of recognition. The ceremony began with a Marine Honor Guard raising the American flag. As it caught the breeze, Hannah's eyes fixed on Colonel Hensley's name on the plaque, then her father's, followed by the long list of fallen Marines who never made it home. Each name represented a story, a family, a promise kept. When it was time for her speech, Hannah stepped forward. Chooper remained perfectly still beside her, as if understanding the solemnity of the moment. Her voice carried clearly across the hillside. "Ordinary places can hold extraordinary promises," she began, looking at the gathered faces. "We are here because promises were kept. This bunker, once forgotten, stood guard over more than military supplies. It protected the sacred bond between brothers in arms." The veterans nodded, some wiping tears from weathered cheeks. Families clutched each other's hands, their eyes fixed on the memorial that finally acknowledged their loved ones. As the sun began its descent, the crowd slowly dispersed, leaving behind a carpet of flowers at the bunker's entrance. Hannah remained, watching the changing light paint the hillside in golden hues. Chooper pressed against her leg, his now many familiar warmth grounding her in the moment. She reached down to scratch his ears, a smile touching her lips. "We did it, Chooper," she whispered. The setting sun caught the newly engraved door, making it shine like a beacon of remembrance against the darkening sky. If even one moment stayed with you, hit subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story written gently for the heart.